Miss Amy Chan is on the Zaddy Zone today, and I can't wait to talk about romance and relationships and breakups with her. Amy is the editor-in-chief of Heart Hackers Club, an online magazine that focuses on the psychology behind love, lust, and desire. Her company has been featured across national media, including Good Morning America, Vogue, Glamour, Nightline, The Times, and CNN, and so much more. She is also the author of Breakup Bootcamp, The Science of Rewiring Your Heart. Amy, g'day.
Hello.
I love this quote from The Observer. They said about you, a relationship expert whose work is like scientific Carrie Bradshaw. I think that's sensational. I wish somebody said that about me. Could you tell me a little bit about what you do day to day? Like, what does the average day in Amy Chan's life look like?
Yeah, so the main thing that I do is my company's called Renew Breakup Bootcamp. So I run these Breakup Bootcamp retreats. They're 4-day getaways in nature where I bring in 13 experts from scientists, behavioral scientists, sex therapists, even a dominatrix, and we help people shift their patterns and subconscious beliefs after breakup or divorce. So I pretty much work in breakup all day, every day. And now I've got all these people who are healed from their breakup and they're like, well, how do I date? And so I'm also now helping people learn the tools of how to date in a healthy way.
Right, because I guess in a relationship, you learn a whole bunch of things or you get to thinking a whole bunch of things about yourself and you need to unlearn those things in order to be able to get back out there in the world, right?
Yeah, I mean, they don't teach you how to do love in school. You have all these hormones. And if you didn't have a healthy model of what love looks like and feels like growing up, you tend to repeat the same emotional experiences when you're an adult.
Yeah, that's absolutely horrifying to me because it's so unconscious. Like, what are we repeating over and over again? You know?
Yeah, so there's something called attractions of deprivation, and it explains how we are drawn to people as adults on a romantic level. We're drawn to people who can wound us in a very familiar way to how we're wounded as children. Our psyche subconsciously tries to recreate the scenario of the crime in an attempt to change its ending. So I'll give you an example. Like I had a very unavailable father. He was an immigrant. He was a business guy. He was never around. And I was always pining for his attention and his love. And I would get some attention when I got good grades or if I was a very good girl in front of his friends. And so I grew up really feeling chemistry and drawn to these guys that were either DJs or club owners. And then when I grew up, a little older, they were like tech CEOs, but I was like, oh, there's no pattern. But if I looked at the emotional experience, it was always the same. It was me editing myself to earn their love, me pining for their affection. And I was hoping subconsciously that if I just gave more, loved more, did more, that I would eventually get that love I never got as a child.
Yeah, and then I'm interested in, if you don't mind talking about how your behavior has shifted since you realized that.
Yeah, I mean, it's taken a lot of work. And
Yeah.
I now know the terminology. I was a love addict. I was severely anxiously attached and I had very, very low self-esteem. And so I joke that I was born with a broken heart. It was just the one area I kept struggling with, which is why I became a relationship columnist, which is why I started a breakup company. And really through a combination of so many different types of healing modalities, I'm now what's called an earned secure, and we could talk about attachment styles if you'd like. And where I'm not codependent. I'm also not afraid of intimacy. I'm also able to self-regulate. So when I feel an emotion, I don't play hot potato with it and make it someone else's problem. And I'm able to communicate my needs and my boundaries, but it's taken practice and these small everyday habits done over time. There's a compound impact. And now I'm just a lot more of a peaceful, happy-go-lucky person.
Yeah, wow, good. That must be so edifying to realize something about yourself and have little behavior shifts and pushing you towards being a better, more fulfilled person.
Yeah, I find it's like unlocking levels of life.
Yeah.
Oh, it just gets a bit easier. Okay, cool.
I had this realization the other day, and I'm not sure if this is aligned with what you're talking about, but I am a supplement freak, right? I love supplements. I'm a supplement hoarder. I have so many, and they were all over the countertop, and my wife cleaned them and put them in a compartment shelf, and she mixed them all up because I know what I take every day, and it was all in a kind of order despite being a mess. And she put them all away at this top shelf that's kind of hard to reach. And I came out and I realized that she'd done it. And she goes, so they're all up there now. And I was immediately upset. And she was like, well, you could say thank you for what I've done. And I walked away and I came back and I go, I realize what this is that is making me upset. I'm the last of 5 kids, and a lot of my stuff was always secondary to the elder kids. You know, they were a little bit more of a priority perhaps, or at least their stuff was taken care of more. And then when I moved overseas to the US, my parents were moving and they were like, your stuff, you need to get rid of it. Like, we don't really want to take care of it and put it into storage for you. So I maybe have a little box that's my stuff and that's it. And all of my stuff was shifted. And so now my things that I have, I kind of like care about them. And if you make me feel like they're not welcome here, then it made me feel uncomfortable. I was immediately upset and I realized there's perhaps a pattern. Is that similar to what you're talking about?
What you're talking about is you're basically being triggered by an association,
right?
Something that has happened in the past. And I mean, that's extremely aware of you that you can actually even slow down, like, oh, wait, what's going on here versus just immediately blaming. And that's huge. But whenever we have this reaction, they have this old adage that says, if it's hysterical, it's historical, right? You want to look at the size of your reaction and see, does it actually match up with what's going on right now? And if not, chances are there's something hysterical there. And there's an opportunity for you to dig a little bit deeper to start understanding the root so you can start healing it.
Yeah, it's we got a lot of questions about how to communicate properly in a fight. And I imagine that if you feel hysterical during a fight, it may be good to stop and do what you were just talking about, kind of looking inward and seeing how you're responsible for what's going on. Would you say that?
Yeah. So something to keep in mind, if you are triggered and you feel that anxiety or the tightness in your chest or that anger, you have to first understand what's going on in your body. So your body is being flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. Adrenaline has a job. It's to make you take action. And you're basically in a survival state. It doesn't care if it's because your supplements are up on a higher shelf or you got a bad email from your boss. It doesn't care. It's like, you're in danger. Do something about it. And it's going to have you do a couple of different reactions. You're either going to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And so the very first thing you want to do when you feel that is, you can't think your way out of that state. You need to do a state change. So the easiest thing to do is, I put on a timer for 2 minutes. You shake your body from head to toe. That will help metabolize the stress hormones. After that, you take some deep breaths. You just want to make sure your exhale is longer than your inhale. That will calm your nervous system down. And that's when your prefrontal cortex, a part of your brain that's logical and rational, comes back online. And then you can start to be like, oh, wait, is this actually, hysterical? You can have an actual logical conversation with yourself or with someone else.
Oh gosh, that's great advice. I love the shaking thing. I've noticed that and I think a lot of people have probably realized this with their partner, in the middle of a fight, somebody will get up and just walk away. And they'll be like, don't leave me. We're in the middle of an argument. And it's like, yeah, I do that. And I'm like, because this argument because it's a fight, it's not going to get resolved right now. I need to go away and breathe and be able to think clearly before this conversation can actually go anywhere. Because right now it's just, we're blaming each other. We're trying to say that it's your fault. You're trying to say it's my fault. And I can just tell when it's going nowhere and I'm upset. I need to leave. And Cara,
right.
My wife, is usually like, don't you walk away from me. And I'm like, that's exactly what I need to do.
Right.
Can I
give you a little feedback there?
Please, that's why you're here.
Okay. So, not to psychoanalyze you, but I am. So yes, I think you got it right. you've got to calm down because you're in a survival state and you're just going to go into a cycle. But you have to let the person know that I'm going to go for a walk for 30 minutes. And after that, when we both calm down, we'll come back. But when you get flooded, so typically when you just like, I got to get out of here, that's when the emotions are too overwhelming and you're being flooded. So you're actually having a flee response. But if you don't let your partner know what's going on, they think, oh my gosh, you're just, being a jerk. And so communicate the timeline and then go off to your thing. And it's important that when you go off and do your walk, you're actually not thinking about it. You're not planning what you're going to say, because that will actually just continue to extend that survival state.
Yeah. Oh, I think communicating would help her so much, because she's like, you just talked over me and now you're leaving, so I don't get to have my say, rather than communicating. And I've heard this before from the fella who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. He talks about how men are automatically want to flee. And he says, go and do a hobby, something you're really good at that will take your mind off it. And like taking a walk, like you mentioned, but he's kind of saying similar to you, don't think about the argument, just kind of like leave it behind and go and do something else, then come back to it with a fresh alert, where you can relax and talk a little bit.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about something that you mentioned, which is really interesting. You haven't mentioned it here. I've just heard you talk about it before, that our attachment styles are made when we're around 2 years old or as early as 2. Is that correct?
Yeah. So for those listening who might not know what attachment theory is, basically explains how the way we attach to our romantic partners as adults are generally formed around 2 years old. And basically there's 3 main types of attachment. There's secure, meaning you're not afraid of intimacy. You're also not codependent. You're able to work through conflict, have conversations. That's about 50% of the population. Now, the next 25% is avoidantly attached. These are typically children who either had a parent who was very controlling, maybe treated their child like a therapist, or lived vicariously through their child, or helicopter parenting, or they just weren't there at all. And what happens is this child associates intimacy with my freedom is going to be taken away, or I'm just going to be let down anyway, so I need to be fiercely independent. So they actually, when someone gets a little bit too close, they will do what's called deactivating strategies to push the person away. The third type, which is what I used to have, is anxiously attached. This is typically children who had inconsistent caregiving. Now, it doesn't mean that you had bad parents. It could have been you had a mother who had postpartum and wasn't that quick to read into your cues and was sometimes there, sometimes wasn't. And what happens is the anxiously attached child has a very activated nervous system and is constantly afraid of being abandoned or rejected. And so what will happen with these children, they grow up being hypervigilant to any cues that the connection is being lost. And if they detect it, you don't hear a text back right away. You see that they raise an eyebrow in a weird way. This activates their survival system, and they will do what's called protest behavior, which can involve punishing, acting aloof, threatening to leave or break up.
So avoidant attachment. I got a few questions from people saying that when I feel, when I'm attracted to someone, when they get attracted to me, I want to leave. That would be avoidant.
I think it could be a few different things. So I want to be careful to not put things under a label if it's actually just a behavioral thing, right? Because you can feel anxiety because someone's inconsistent and acting all shady. It doesn't mean you have an anxious attachment style.
Right.
So you want to look at what is the fundamental fear. Is your fear that intimacy is going to take away your freedom and autonomy? Or is your fear, I'm going to be abandoned? And that can give you an idea of which category you fall under. And there's a really good quiz. It takes about 10 minutes that can give you an accurate assessment of where you're at.
Yeah. And the 50% that you mentioned, the secure attached, what is their biggest fear generally? Is there a fear?
Well, I think that they just don't have a nervous system that is so reactive to intimacy.
Got it.
And so if there's a problem, they're able to talk about it. They don't turn an issue into a huge catastrophe, where someone with an anxious attachment, if there's a problem, they're like, oh my God, I'm going to be left, or I can't say what I want because they're just going to leave me. Yeah. So it's kind of a dysfunctional relationship to relationship.
Yeah, got it. I've a listener asked, actually, no, why are we attracted to people who are bad for us? That came up so much. And I know that you are great at speaking about this because I've heard you speak about it before, but we got so many questions about this. Why am I attracted to somebody who's bad for me?
Yeah. So I talked a little bit about attractions of deprivation, and something we need to really understand is human beings are drawn to what's familiar. It's across the board, whether it's food, music, or romantic partners. So like I mentioned, the example with unavailable father, that's what my familiarity was. That's my homeostasis. Like someone who's unavailable, I have to chase them down. And so I grew up having 10 out of 10 attractions, thinking I met my soulmate 24 times. When I met someone who was unavailable, aloof, I didn't know if they liked me or they didn't. And the people who actually liked me and were kind and supportive, I was like, oh, you're boring. I don't feel chemistry. And so basically familiarity. Another reason is something called intermittent reinforcement. And so to explain this, we're going to look at rats. And so they've done studies on rats where they put rats in a cage and there's a lever, and every time the rat pressed the lever, it would get a pellet of food. The rat learns, I do this action, I get food. That's continuous reinforcement, no big deal. Then the researchers were like, well, what happens if we sometimes give a pellet of food when it presses a lever, but sometimes we don't? And what they found was the rats got completely obsessed over pressing the lever so much that they stopped drinking water, they stopped grooming themselves, a lot of them died, they just got manically obsessed. And it's the same reason why the slot machines are the most profitable at a casino. So whether you're that rat or you're a gambler or you're this person just waiting on breadcrumbs, hoping that this person you like is going to check your IG story, it's the same thing. When you don't know when the reward is going to come, when it's unpredictable, that's what gets you hooked and addicted.
Yes, I know that feeling of like looking through your Instagram stories for someone particular. You're like, did she see it? It's terrible. It's a terrible place to be, because even if they do see it, you don't know if it's a good thing. Are they looking because they don't like you? Are they looking to see what this idiot is up to? Or are they looking because they like you? And so it's just like, either way, it sucks.
It does suck. And what's happening to your brain, though, because when you don't know if that attention is going to come, that little morsel, you get a bigger burst of dopamine. So you go, whoa, oh my gosh, like maybe they do like me. And then they're not checking your Instagram stories for a week. And then they slide into your DMs and they're like, hey, and then you get another spike. And that intensity of up and down, that's what gets us hooked. And then we think, oh, it's because this person's so amazing. No, absolutely not. It's a psychological phenomenon of intermittent reinforcement.
Right. I often tell people, particularly my wife's friends who are single, who are like, I just don't know if this guy's into me. I'm so into him. I don't know what's going on. And I say to them, if you get maybe vibes, it's a no. And I think that's because, and I think that's a personal thing for me, that I used to be the guy who'd give maybes because I always knew that it was a no, but I didn't, so my behavior would say maybe. I would tell them no because I was usually very honest in the way that I spoke. But what do you think about that advice? A maybe is a no.
I think we need to look at what they are communicating. And when I say communicating, it's not just in their words. I do hear this more often with men than women in my line of work, that a guy will say, I'm not looking for anything serious. This is just casual. Are you okay with that? And the woman will be like, oh yeah, like totally fine. But then the guy will act in ways which has relationship vibes sometimes. And then the woman is like, well, they're acting this way, so they really don't mean it. And so when I say look at how they're communicating, it's not just what they're saying with their words. Yeah. It's how are they acting? How are they showing up? Are they being consistent? Mm-hmm. And so I think you really need to look at that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's one of my regrets from when I was single is that with my voice, and my communication, my oral communication, I would say, I'm not interested in a serious relationship, but then I'd have sex with them, which is a really strong message to send to somebody. Sex is so intimate. And so like, I take everything that I want from you. You're going to get everything that you want from me. And what I regret is the fact that, yes, with my words, I was honest, but with my body, I was dishonest. You know?
Yeah, I get it.
But so I was that guy. You know, I was the one giving maybe vibes and making, you know, perhaps really confusing some women.
So what made you give yes vibes to your current wife? What was different?
Oh, she just, well, it was immediate. She blew me away. I mean, let me just say this. Before I met her, her best friend used to work out at the gym that I worked at, and we became friends. I added her best friend on Instagram. I saw my wife, and when I saw her, I was like, who is that? To the best friend, I was like, can you please introduce me? And she was like, the best friend didn't give me a yes or no. She's like, yeah, well, I'll let you know. And I could not stop thinking about her. And I just was haunted by her. And I'd come to a new area of my career. I'd booked a nice big job, and I was all of a sudden starting to get noticed in the industry. And I was looking for somebody serious. I told my friends, I started telling everybody, like, I would like to find a partner now. And then I started going on some dating websites on Raya, and I met an attractive woman who invited me for a weekend away to wherever she was shooting. And I was like, oh, hell yeah, like, I'll definitely come. And I went to book the ticket. And as I'm booking the ticket, I'm like, hold on, what about Cara, who I'd never met before, who I had no idea if I was ever going to even date this person or go on a date with them. I had no plan to DM her and ask for a date. I really didn't want to do that. And so then I had to write to this woman and go, I'm not going to come. I'm sorry. I just don't have a good feeling about this. The following Monday, Cara slid in my DMs. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, things like that are a little like magical and like special and pretty incredible. And then when we went on our first date, it was just immediate. I felt immediately, I was like, this is very special. And there was no doubt that I was going to give yes vibes. And the way that she gave me the yes vibes back were the most incredible thing. Like we'd go out to a party or something like that. And the way in which, when we were at the party, I would always, before the party, expect that she would maybe flirt with other guys. And I was like, what is that? What's that learned expectation that you go out with your girlfriend and that she's going to hit on other guys? What is that? And I guess it did happen in younger relationships, but her yes vibe for me, her yes to me was so strong, and mine was to her, that it was like, well, look at us, just yes, pure yes.
That's amazing. You know, what's so cool about your story is that I really believe that when we're on the precipice of change, the universe will do a dangle. And it's like, do you really want what you say you want? And it's going to pose a path for you. And a lot of the times people will take the path that's going to give them instant gratification or what they've done in the past, or they'll do something that, you know, might be a bit more uncomfortable, might not have an immediate payoff. And it sounds like that's what you did. You made space. You didn't fall under an old habit of just hooking up with someone who's like hot. And you actually aligned your actions with your intention, even though you didn't know how it was going to all play out.
Yeah. So the gentleman that you're with now, what is he like?
Oh, he's awesome. So the fascinating thing is, I said I was ready. I was single for 5 years in New York, and I was dating a storm. And I had a friend who was like, hey, I can set you up with this guy. You say you want a relationship. He showed me his picture, and in one look, I was like, no. And because in my head, I'm like, oh, he looks like a finance guy. And I had a thing, I don't date finance guys. I only date tech entrepreneurs. So I said no. And then about a year later, I did really get to a place where I stopped being so stuck in my patterns, and I felt like I really was opening up. And I saw him on Hinge, and I didn't recognize him from before. Swiped, we started talking, and then back then it showed you had mutual friends. So I contacted my friend Michelle. I was like, "Hey, do you know this guy named Paul? It says you have a mutual friend." And he's like, "You dummy! I tried to set you up." I was like, "Oh my gosh!" So it really shows like how sometimes we say we want a relationship, but we have an idea in our head of our type, of what we want, what we don't want, and we could be so closed. But he's just someone who has so much integrity. He is so consistent in his values, and he's just never played games from day one. And I remember like after we met, our first date was amazing. He had already told me he was going to get off the dating apps, and he did. And 2 weeks into us dating, things were going great. And I was like, I didn't delete my apps, but I was like, well, maybe I should just check, and maybe I should just act a little aloof. And I was like, wait a minute, where's this shit coming from? Like this manipulation thing that I'm doing, the hedging thing. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just not going to do those old antics. I deleted the app. I didn't pretend to be all cool and showed that I liked him. And, we ended up moving together to Vancouver during the pandemic, and we've been together for 3 years now.
Wow, beautiful. So just to clarify, what were you thinking of doing with the app? You were thinking of just leaving the app up while you were dating him?
I'm just going to check the messages just to see.
Oh, okay. And that was kind of like a thing that you may have done in previous relationships, just kind of like play it a little bit. I don't know. What do you call that? Like,
it's called hedging.
Hedging. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah, cool. And then you were like, no, what am I doing?
It's to take the edge off when you like someone so that you have backup.
Yeah. Just in case they break up with you. Well, I've got other people over here like that.
Yeah. Or they don't like me back enough, then I'll just go over here.
Got it. Something I mentioned that you also mentioned was that you told your friends that you were looking for something serious. Do you recommend that that's what people do when they're looking for something serious, that they tell people?
I don't think that that's what you need to do. I think you need to get real honest if your words are aligned with your actions. And I mean, I have a lot of friends who right now they're like, I'm 40. I really want to have a family. And I'm looking for a relationship. And then they tell me what they want. They're like, oh, well, they have to be like this tall, or no, I like girls who like look this way. Like, and so when they tell me what they want, it's a list of superficial things. It's not about, I want to feel this way with this person, because the person that you're going to end up with might look very different than the image you had in your mind. And a lot of the times people say they want a relationship, but they're actually very closed. And all these excuses of why people aren't good for them, they're actually subconscious ways that they push away intimacy.
So to consider more how you want your person to make you feel.
Yeah, and research actually shows that what the problem people have, especially using dating apps, is it's something called present bias, where you're optimizing for things that are going to be valuable for you right now. So looks, money, status, house in the Hamptons. And then, but the research actually shows that human beings, we adapt. So you might be dating someone, they're a 10 out of 10, but 5 years, 10 years down the road, so you have kids or whatnot, they're not a 10 out of 10 anymore for you. You've adapted to that. So that excitement that you're with this really hot person or this very rich person, it eventually fades and you go back to your baseline. But what actually matters in the long term are things like empathy, your ability to just move through time together, that you actually like the person, shared values, not necessarily shared hobbies. It doesn't matter if you both love skiing, but your values and that you're growing towards something. Those are the things that do matter.
Yeah. And how do you figure out what your values are?
So I actually have an exercise I do with people where I have them fill out what are their top 5 values, and then I have them score themselves 0 to 10 where they land. Because people also, they say, I want this. I want someone who's very generous and honest. And I'm like, oh, you score yourself a 10 out of 10. but you're honest with your coworkers, but you're not honest with your sister about these major issues. So you're actually not honest because you can't have integrity part-time when it's convenient. And so I have people start being more aligned in their own values and then being aware of the values they want in a partner, and then writing down the 3 to 4 non-negotiables. These are the clear red lines, and they're going to be different for everyone. But if anyone, whether it's a friend or romantic partner, hits one of them, it's an automatic no. And you need to re-look at this sheet, because when you meet someone, there's love drugs. You're pretty much high. And it's going to cause you to rationalize all the things that aren't a fit and be like, oh, but the sex is great. But you look back at the non-negotiables, and if it hits it, it's a no.
Oh, got it. And the non-negotiables, could you give me a few examples of what that might look like?
Yeah. So I say it's unique because, for example, someone might say monogamy, they must be monogamous. But some might be like, no, I want poly only. Mine is hard drugs. Psychedelics, okay.
Right.
So those are certain things. Availability. As someone who constantly dated people who were unavailable, both physically and emotionally, they had to be available, meaning they actually lived in the same place that I lived in. Because it's very convenient also to date someone who lives across the country, and just say, oh, I'm not meeting anyone, but you're choosing people where you actually can't develop a relationship with.
Yeah, wow. That's super interesting. It is interesting, the idea that people write down honesty as their list of values and score themselves a 10, which is like automatic dishonesty. Like, in a way, it's like you score yourself a 10 out of 10 for honesty. That's kind of, I bet that's dishonest, Yeah. Because, honesty's, that's funny. That's very funny. Getting attached too quickly seems to be a common theme for a lot of people. How can people better track their emotions when in the early dating phase?
So people who veer more anxiously attached tend to jump into relationships very quickly, and they try to seal the deal. Because this comes from like, oh my God, I'm going to lose it. And so for people who veer more anxiously attached, I tell them to really slow it down. Slow down the intimacy, because look, there's some people who can have sex like Samantha and sport fuck, amazing, good for you. But there's also a lot of people, especially if you veer more anxiously attached, you get hooked the minute you have sex or you have an orgasm. And because there's chemicals that are causing you to bond, right? Women will secrete oxytocin, which is a bonding chemical. And so if you haven't developed trust emotionally, don't get into bed with them, right? There's one. And I think for those who veer more avoidant, they tend to get really excited for the first 3 months. And then they start to look at all the imperfections like, oh, no, not the one. And so for those people, I will tell them, don't lay it on so strong and do the flowers and the dates and like the conquesting vibes, because you're so motivated by dopamine that what happens is once the 3-month mark happens, you stop doing that stuff. The person thinks something's wrong and you've already set precedent. And so be honest with what you can actually maintain. And after the 3-month mark, don't just peace out. Give yourself a longer timeline if you have a tendency to just break up with people right away.
Right. If you know from your history that after 3 months or so that you tend to pull back, well, maybe consider that in the first few months.
Right. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about what you mentioned before about friends who, were moving up towards their 40s who really wanted to have a family. That can be a really difficult time to date for a lot of people, women in particular, because they're hungry. They're really hungry. Their body's crying out to them like, let's have a family, let's have a family. Any tips for women who are around that age, who are in the dating scene and struggling?
Yeah. So when we feel like there's a time crunch, or we feel like there's not enough supply, that's what causes us to make decisions out of desperation and out of scarcity. And so I really do feel like a part of the foundational work there is to do things that will help you have an abundance mindset. And this could be a combination of meditation, mindfulness exercises, those things that actually build a solid foundation where you're not operating from this place of scarcity and fear. And the second thing is it's like also reframing. And I know that there's people who break up and they're whatever their age, whether they're 24, 34, 44, or 64, they always say, oh my God, I'm too old. You're always going to think you're too old, but there's always going to be someone who's older than you. And so like for the people in your 40s, I go like, amazing. Guess what you get? You get to tap into the market of the newly divorced people. Those are the ones who learn their lessons from their first marriage. And they are like, I'm not going to repeat that. They've probably gone to therapy. So you have a woke version of them. Amazing. And so I think you need to really train yourself to have that mindset.
And almost to like, you know, be okay with letting go of the expectations, all the things that you expect for your life, and maybe go, maybe I could fall in love with my life without all the things that I expected.
Yeah, make your life amazing, right? And like, I love my partner. He's incredible. And I do believe like we will grow old together. And because my life is so awesome, and because I know fundamentally I am okay, I am safe, I have everything that I need, I don't need to love afraid. And I don't need to be afraid of, oh my God, will the shoe drop? Will he possibly cheat on me? Will blah, blah. Like things might happen and I will get bruised and I will get back up. And so because of that lack of fear, I'm able to have conversations about boundaries, about my needs. I'm not acting as if like, oh my God, I'm going to get, you know, abandoned. And so, and that's taken, you know, a lot of work, right? It's taken becoming more secure. It's been taking building your self-esteem, your self-worth.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you get to enjoy your life when you get to love fully when you don't love afraid.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about the 2 stages of a relationship. Could you tell me about that, particularly the second stage?
Yeah. So most people are aware of like the beginning stage. This is a passionate stage of love. You're blissed out on dopamine. Dopamine is the reward chemical. It motivates you to get more of what you want. So whether that's ice cream, cocaine, or your lover. This time is very exciting because you don't know the future yet. There's all this possibility. And this generally lasts on average between 12 to 18 months. Your body actually cannot continue functioning in this elevated drug-induced state. You then move into what's called the companionate stage of love. And there's actually a shift in the chemicals. It shifts from being future-oriented to appreciating the present. So there's what's called the here and now chemicals, which is namely oxytocin, serotonin. These are the chemicals that make you appreciate. It's a lot more calm. It's a lot more peaceful. You know what you're going to get. There's a sense of stability. And so when people don't know this, they think something is wrong in the relationship when they don't want to just jump their partner every time they see them. And they're like, oh my God, I don't have butterflies. This must mean the relationship's over. No, this is a natural progression of the relationship evolution in terms of the chemicals. And it just means that you can't just rely on Mother Nature and biology to do the work for you. You need to put in the work now to keep passion alive, to keep sex exciting, to bring novelty in. So I think it's important for people to know that.
That is super important for people to know. I remember when I broke up with my last girlfriend before my wife, and I remember feeling this pang of, I felt like I maybe had not worked hard enough, and it made me wonder if I should go back. And I went back and auditioned it a couple of times. I went back and auditioned it with her and realized, I'd made a mistake coming back, which was, you know, a rough thing to do to somebody after a breakup. How can we know? You know, how can you know if you've not worked hard enough? You've talked about this second stage where it kind of does take a little bit more work. You know, the Mother Nature's not taking care of you so much anymore. How can we know when we've worked hard enough and when it's just time to let go?
Yeah, I think there's some relationships that it doesn't matter how much you work, it just doesn't fit.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a few things, right? Should I stay or should I go is a huge question I get all the time. And what happens to a lot of people is we fall under what's called sunk cost fallacy. So sunk costs are costs we could never get back. And it's usually used in the stock market where people keep throwing good money after a bad deal. And we do this in relationships. We go like, well, we've already had 5 years together. We've invested in therapy. Maybe we have a dog. And so you keep investing because you're like, well, maybe I'm going to get that payout one day. Maybe it's going to be worth it. They're going to change. We're going to start getting along. But this is the fallacy. And so instead you're supposed to ask yourself, okay, I can't ever recoup what I've already invested. If I was to make the same decision right now, knowing what I know, and things are going to stay the same, would I choose this person again? And you're basing your decision off present and future value versus what has been invested already. Also, something to consider is there's something called positivity bias that happens after a breakup. So what happens is we go through this emotional turmoil because the chemicals are all out of whack, and the pain of separation can be so much. What happens is positivity bias is the psychological phenomenon where it causes us to remember the romantic, the positive events. So we're more likely to remember that romantic dinner in Hawaii than the negative part, all the fights we had during the rest of the trip. There's also what's called the fading affect bias, where the memories associated with negative emotions, they tend to be forgotten over those associated with positive emotions. So those two different biases cause us to sometimes remember the good and put them on a pedestal and not remember all the reasons why it didn't work out. So I would be very honest, write a list of all the reasons why it didn't work out. What was their accountability? What's yours accountability? What's just stuff that can't ever change? And knock them off of the pedestal, knowing that our brain is going to have us have these biases. And then if you're going to get back together, well, what is going to change? Are you going to go through therapy? Are they going to go through therapy? There has to be change and a strategy in place on both sides, and also a timeline. How will you know that things are actually getting better and you're not just drawn back into attachment? And it's going to be helpful to have a third party, like a therapist or a coach, to help you in with those check-ins at, say, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, to see, is this coming back together actually working?
Yeah, God, that's so good. I'm going to tell you something now. This is an opinion of mine that you may not like, so it'll make it really interesting. I think that breakups over text or over the call or over the phone are good, and that we should do away with this idea got to break up in person, because you do it, right? It's okay, let's just say I'm going to break up with you and we meet up in order to do so. I break up with you. You are going to be a heaping, weeping mess on the ground. But if I call you or text you, you get to have that moment alone without me seeing the further humiliation of me seeing you weeping like that. What do you think about it?
Hi, Luke. I think that's a very, very convenient solution for you or whoever who does that, because you are assuming that they want to be a crying mess by themselves, right? But it really gets you off the hook because you don't have to deal with those emotions that this person is having. And if if you've been on a few dates with someone, no, you don't need to go up in person. But if you shared a history with someone, it is the human and kind thing to do. No matter what you say, they're going to feel hurt and rejected. The point of your conversation isn't to take away that pain. They need to go through that pain and go through the grieving process. Your point is to respect the relationship and do your part to end it with as much grace and kindness as you possibly can.
Oh, God. Wow. You made me feel really bad for that silly opinion that I had, but you're absolutely right. And I'm sorry.
It's okay. We workshopped it.
We workshopped it. We really did. So somebody asked the question, what do I do if my parents, my family and friends think that I could do better than my boyfriend? What can you do in those situations?
I mean, I think it really matters what you think. If you think you could do better, then that's one story. But if you think your family and friends are incorrect, you need to have a conversation with them, because them just passing judgment isn't going to make you leave your partner. You have to come to that realization yourself if that is the path that's going to happen. And you have to set boundaries. You can let them know that, like, hey, I understand you have an opinion and you care about me, and that opinion comes from love. But so you know, it's actually doing more damage and causing me more stress. And you need to trust that I know how to live my life. And I would appreciate if you don't have those conversations with me anymore. And if they continue to do so, even though you repeat your boundary, and I think anyone listening, this is how you do boundaries. You repeat the boundary. If they cannot listen and they don't show any sign that they're going to, there needs to be a consequence. And that might mean you stop talking to them for a bit. You might have to not have them in your life at all. But there has to be a boundary for someone continuously crossing your boundary, a consequence. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've often noticed that the social norm for when a friend of yours is in a relationship that, like, is terrible, and whenever you go out with them, they're always fighting, and letting your friend know, hey, mate, this isn't good. Like, you're not in a good spot. People generally think, let them figure that out. And I want to know, like, is that the good friend thing to do? I often feel like I should speak up and tell friends, like, hey, this isn't good. Like, you don't seem to be enjoying yourself very much in this relationship.
Yeah, I think that you can ask if they want feedback.
Right.
And it's just the right thing to do, because they will also be more receptive, right? Because if you're like, hey, Johnny, Daddy, like I've kind of noticed some changes in you lately. Would you be open to some feedback? They're probably going to say yes.
Totally.
And then you could say, like, well, I notice that every time you're together, you seem and you want to focus the conversation about what you notice in your friend versus vilifying the person that they're with, because they will automatically get defensive. And then after that, the follow-up conversations aren't you repeating it. It's you asking questions so that they can come up with the answer.
Yeah, I've thought about a movie called Good Friend. That's the story of a man trying to break up his best friend and his girlfriend. Anyway, because I often think, like, I'm not being a good friend if I'm not honest with my friend. And I've lost some friends, I think, who were wild, beautiful stallions in their single days to naggy women. And I see them shrivel from their stallion form into this little submissive toad, and it makes me very sad.
Yeah. Little toads, so sad.
But
So
everyone experiences that. Like, they see their friends and they watch them shrivel. It's a really awful thing. But you're right, though. It's probably best before you give any critical thought, especially about a relationship. It's so intimate and personal, that you ask for permission first.
Yeah, it's also not our job to be the fixer. And so it's something, especially if you are a very empathetic person, if you've taken that role on in childhood, it can show up where you want to just go in and fix them and save them or rescue them. But really, like, it's their life. All you could do is provide some honest feedback. And also, we need to be cognizant of people. Do they have the capacity to listen to your feedback or receive your feedback? And sometimes it's a matter of timing. Sometimes they're not going to be able to listen to it at all. Sometimes if you're dealing with someone who has, like, histrionic personality disorder or a narcissist, you don't want to at all, because you actually jeopardize your own safety. I've learned that the hard way. So yeah, you have to also be cognizant of who you're talking to.
Yeah, and I do think that it's a very male thing to want to fix rather than to just listen. I've learned that with my wife. Like, sometimes it'll be like, I want to vent. And I'm like, well, I want to fix. And she's like, well, I don't want you to fix. Just let me vent.
That's great communication on her part.
Well, she didn't say that. Let's be fair. She didn't say that. I had to figure that out. I was like, she doesn't want me to fix. She wants me to listen. I've got some, let's talk about communication. And we talked a little bit earlier about fights, but somebody said they're in the military and they have to be away from home a lot. How can they keep communication fun and fresh with their wife?
Yeah. So I can understand when you're away from your partner, what can happen. And so what's really important is some sense of consistency, because what that does is it tells your nervous system that everything is okay and that you're safe and that the bond is safe. So even if that's a touch base, and if you can at like a certain time of the day, maybe it's a morning text or it's an evening text, or, around 6 p.m. you do a FaceTime check-in.
Yeah.
That consistency is going to be key. When you're not consistent and say you had a night out and you couldn't, that's when the other person will register something's off and they will get anxiety about it. So if that's the case, let them know ahead of time.
Wow.
Other ways you can keep things fun, like you could do things like ASMR, send them some audio, send them some video, like do a separate, during the pandemic, a lot of people had to deal with this, like relationships that were long distance. You could do a date night where you both order pizza with candlelight and you kind of have this experience together. You could read a book at the same time. I actually did this with my partner. We both got the book Nonviolent Communication. We both read it, and then we would discuss what we learned after we read each chapter and kind of share. So there are these things that you can do where you can grow together and keep bonding and just have that as your thing. It doesn't mean you have to talk for hours a day, but just a regular, consistent touch point.
Wow, that's such good advice. I'm so glad I didn't have that advice when I was doing long distance, because we needed to break up. So that was, I'm so glad I didn't know all that, because that's great. It's great advice. What about people, you mentioned the pandemic. What about people who, find themselves, especially parents who are finding themselves working at home more often now and trying to keep that relationship fun and fresh? That can be pretty difficult.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something about, not leaving to the office and not having this ritual of leaving, dressing up, coming back. And I'm dealing with this right now. Both of my partner have offices in the home, and it's hard to be like, oh my gosh, novelty date night when you've been working for 8 hours and then you're in sweatpants.
Yes.
And so I think you need to make more of a conscious effort to have these points of the workday ends and then our quality time starts. So something that you could do is, even if you're in the same home, you wear something that's when you're working. Maybe you change out of your clothes when you're done your workday. Maybe at the end of the workday, you come together and you have a hug and you sip some tea, whatever it is. You do some ritual that shows we're now going into the hangout quality time of the day. Something I find really helpful is I have a ritual. So every time we have dinner at home, we talk about what we're grateful for before we eat. And sometimes it's monotonous. We're talking about the same things, but it really does prime your brain to focus on the things that you like about your partner. And having that constant thing every single day, it makes a huge difference. So find the rituals that work for you, but you've got to set them up. And
the gratitude that you're explaining, you're saying what you are grateful for about him, or just in general?
In general, but every day he ends up making it to the list.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, that's probably a good note for your breakup thing. It's like, if you're no longer grateful for them, it's probably time to have a good think about it.
Right.
What about?
And if I'm pissed, I'm just like, I'm grateful for you because you're awesome, and then I'll go on to the other stuff.
What about for instance, being at home and the relationship can get stale. So, what do you think about peeing with the door open? Do you think it's good to not do that and to keep some level of, I don't know, mystery, because you're working together all the time and seeing each other all the time?
I think you need to remind yourself that there are certain things we did in the, passionate stage of a relationship. And yes, it's chemicals, but it's also what we were doing. We were trying new fun things. We were dressing up for our partner. We cared if we were wearing sweatpants or something, looking presentable. We didn't talk in a baby voice. I'm guilty of doing that. Terrible.
Really?
Yeah. My boyfriend's like, that's really not sexy. I was like, oh shit. So I think you need to really remind yourself of what did you do in the beginning stages and get back to that. And that might mean you need to not be so lazy. It might mean that you have to like write a list to remind yourself. It might mean that you put a reminder to do one nice thing for your partner. But if you wouldn't do it in your first 3 to 6 months of dating, why would you do it in 3 years?
Yeah. So
yeah,
kind of
close the fucking door.
yeah, right. Yeah. Be a little bit pretend you don't poo.
Yeah.
That's what it was at the beginning there. My partner, this is a question from a listener. My partner is not into sex and intimacy, and I am. Any tips?
I think that it's normal for us to have mismatched sex drives.
Mm-hmm.
This could be a hormonal thing. Men tend to, in their 40s, drop in testosterone. Mm-hmm. And sometimes men need to like work on that, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think you just have to have a very honest conversation and like also see how important is intimacy for you. If you're okay with having less sex than you did in the beginning, cool. But if you're like, oh my God, this is not the life that I want, and intimacy is so important, it's such a high value in my life and sexuality, then you might need to have a very serious conversation and see, is this something you can be on the same page on? And if your partner is open, your partner might not be into intimacy in the sense they might not look at you and just want to rip off your clothes like they did in the beginning, but they might really enjoy it once they get into it. And so you might want to set up 1 day a week where it's 2 hours without your phone. And intimacy doesn't need to be intercourse. It could be, we're going to take a bath with candles. We're not going to do anything. Okay, next week, we'll take a turn to giving massages, right? Those are things that you can do that is intimacy, and you can build up from there.
Yeah, there certainly is an issue with, I guess I would be the one between me and Cara who's more down for sex more often. And what I've noticed is it's not good to be like, oh, can we have sex now? It's like, it's better to have set it up so that, you've been kissing them and loving them all day. And, you've done a couple of acts of service and some quality time that isn't about trying to get into their pants and trying to get them into bed, right when you want to go. Like, it's like, maybe this person needs massaging to get to that place.
Yeah, you got it. Ding, 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 Luke.
That's all I wanted to hear from you. It was just a bit of that validation from Amy Chan. What a beautiful thing. Well, I'm going to link in our show notes to your book, Breakup Bootcamp. I'm also going to link to your website if anybody's interested in anything we've talked about, including Amy's retreat, which sounds sensational. That'll all be in the show notes. But tell us about the best ways we can follow you, Amy.
Yeah, so my website's renewbreakupbootcamp.com, and you can follow me on Instagram or TikTok at Miss Amy Chan.
Oh, I've got to find you on TikTok. Are you crushing it there? Are you loving putting out content?
I'm not crushing it, but I'm loving it. Yeah.
I mean, look, everything that you say, I mean, you are so full of information, and this has been one of my favorite podcasts because it's like, wow, I had to really concentrate because your information is thick and fast. But I'm telling you, everything you have to say is a perfect little soundbite. So you should be rocking TikTok. I mean, because you have so much to give.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. This was so fun. I feel like, I mean, your personality is just so like easy to get along with, but I just feel like I'm just shooting the shit with a friend. So,
yeah,
like,
I love this.
Amazing.
If you ever come to LA, be sure to get in contact and maybe we can have a drink or even an Erewhon smoothie.
Yeah. Yes.
I would love that.
Yay.
Thanks so much for talking, Amy. You're great.